right now, gold is at or over all-time highs. And you've said that the rising price of gold is a warning sign. So what I want to know is, what is a high gold price a warning sign of?
Yeah, well, first of all, gold closed today above 4,200. It was just a week ago that it traded above 4,000 for the first time, and now we're $200 higher than that. Silver closed above $53. That's an all-time record high for the price of silver. Back in the, I guess, the latter 1990s, when Alan Greenspan was Fed chair, he was asked about gold, when he went to Congress to testify, because he was an old school gold bug. He wrote an article, The Case for Gold, which is in one of Ayn Rand's books, Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. So he was a big gold advocate. And so he was often asked about gold. And in one of these questions, he said that even though we're not on a gold standard, he said that he uses gold as a tool. And he looks at the gold price as an indication of whether or not he's got the correct monetary policy. And he said, if gold is, up towards 400, that means that my policy is too loose. And if I see it down, at 300, then I'm too tight. Of course, at the time, it was around 350, right? So he said, look, I'm watching gold's reaction to see what it does, to know if I've got the correct interest rate, because I'm looking for a market signal. So he said, while we're not technically on a gold standard, I'm using gold as a way to conduct monetary policy, because it's a market mechanism to let me know if the policy is correct. Well, now gold is soaring. And so what that would tell Greenspan, if he was still Fed chairman, is that monetary policy is too loose and that interest rates need to be higher. Yet, despite this, the Fed is poised to cut rates even more. And so gold is a warning sign, A, that the Fed has got the policy wrong, that these rate cuts are a mistake, and that, in fact, rates are too low and they need to be raised. But I also think it's a bigger warning that the world is getting rid of the dollar, that foreign central banks, foreign governments are losing confidence in the dollar as a stable long-term store of value. They have no confidence in the fiscal responsibility of the United States Congress or the president to get his house in order. And they're losing confidence in the independence of the Fed, which is being beat up constantly by Trump, putting political pressure on the Fed to cut rates, print money, create inflation. And so I think the world is moving away from the dollar. And we haven't seen this kind of movement in the price of gold since the 1970s. This is the best year for gold. Gold's up almost 60% on the year.
Oh,
and you have to go back to the 1970s to find a year where that happened. And there were several years during the 70s when that happened. But the significance of the 70s is we went off the gold standard in 1971. And when we did that, it was a game changer for the monetary system, and the dollar lost a lot of value. And so gold went from $35 an ounce to $850. But what's happening now, I think, is just as significant, maybe more so, because now it's not the U.S. that's going off the gold standard. It's the world that's going off the dollar standard. And what this means for America is a complete collapse in our entire economy and our standard of living, because over the past 50 years, we've grown completely dependent on the dollar's reserve status. That's how we're able to live beyond our means. That's what makes these trade deficits possible. That's why we can buy stuff, consume what we don't produce. That's why so many Americans can borrow without anybody saving, because we're tapping into the rest of the world's productivity and the rest of the world's savings. And the vehicle to do that is the dollar and its status. Well, as the dollar loses that status, our ability to rely on foreign production and foreign savings is gone. And that means our whole economy implodes, because without foreign production, foreign factories, we can't produce the goods that we consume, and we don't have the savings to finance our massive debt. And so we're headed for an economic crisis much greater than the 2008 financial crisis. That is what gold should be telling everybody, that a monetary crisis, a U.S. dollar crisis, a debt crisis is just around the corner, right? This is the economic, canary in the coal mine that's dying here. And I think this is a bigger warning than the subprime blow up in 2007 was about the financial crisis that hit in 2008. And when the subprime market blew up, it was obvious to me what was coming because I had seen years in advance that the subprime market would implode. And I knew that a financial crisis would follow. But most people on Wall Street, including the Fed, actually had no clue. Even when subprime blew up, Ben Bernanke said, don't worry about it. It's contained. And I knew that was nonsense. Well, the same thing is happening now. I've been waiting for years. I've been predicting for years what is happening in gold would eventually happen. It's now happening for the very reasons I always warned that it would happen. And now what it is confirming is that the currency and sovereign debt crisis that I've been warning about for decades now, not just years, is finally upon us. And it should happen maybe as early as next year.
That is, I think, a very astute prediction, and you're getting at the cause and effect, but I want to drill into the actual mechanisms that make this happen. So you've thrown out a couple ideas. One is this sense we need to get our house in order. I want to know what that is. Another is that the world is moving away from the dollar. So there's going to be some mechanistic reason why they don't trust it anymore. I want to understand that. But I want to frame it in the idea of in 1971, we go off the gold standard in a very acute moment. So Nixon goes on and he says, hey, everybody, I know that we previously would give you gold for your dollars. Sorry, we're not doing that anymore. And you had a moment right then. You could just point to a calendar and say, that's exactly when it happened down to the minute. We don't have that same kind of thing happening now, which I think is a big part of why people are able to confuse themselves or tell themselves a story. So walk me through the mechanisms of how the dollar got in trouble. Is this just a game of debt? So what does it mean to have our house in order?
Yeah. Well, first of all, going back to the Coinage Act of 1792, right, after our republic was first born, the dollar was legally defined as a weight of gold or silver. So that's what a dollar was. It wasn't that dollars were backed by gold. The dollar was gold. The dollar was silver. And of course, back then there was no paper currency, but there were banknotes that were issued by private banks, but they were just IOUs for dollars, which were gold and silver coins. Now, when the Federal Reserve was first introduced in 1913 as basically a private banking syndicate that issued notes, again, those notes were not dollars. And in fact, even if you take a Federal Reserve note today and you look at it and you read it, it says this note is legal tender. It doesn't say this dollar is legal tender. It says this note. And a note is a promise to pay. Originally, those promises paid dollars. The dollars were gold and silver. Now, in 1933, during the Depression, Roosevelt suspended the convertibility of notes to lawful dollars, and in fact made it illegal for Americans to own gold. And so you can no longer take your Federal Reserve note to the Federal Reserve Bank and get gold.
Peter, why did he do that? Was that they needed the gold for something, or
because the government, they wanted to do a big stimulus, but they didn't have the printing press the way they did today. We were on a gold standard. And so Roosevelt basically took everybody's gold and gave everybody $20 an ounce. And then after they got the gold, they devalued the dollar and said, okay, the gold we just took away from you is now worth $35 an ounce. And that gave the U.S. government a lot of extra money to spend to try to stimulate the economy. That was how they ran this stimulus.
That's wild. So they confiscated people's gold so that they could debase the currency.
Yes. So, but of course, a lot of people didn't turn in their gold. They kept it. They were smart. The smart ones didn't turn it in. But they appealed to your sense of patriotism. Like, we need to do this to help, get us out of this depression. But Roosevelt didn't tell people what he was going to do with the value of the dollar once everybody turned in their gold. But he never did this, to foreigners. So they never suspended the convertibility of the dollar to gold for overseas holders of these notes. And in fact, when we had the Bretton Woods at the end of the Second World War, where the world agreed that we would have this monetary system backed by the dollar, right, the Federal Reserve notes, even though American citizens couldn't take them to the Fed and get gold, the Germans, the French, the Japanese, the Italians, any other foreign bank that owned the Fed, had Federal Reserve notes, could go to the Federal Reserve, and if they gave them 35 notes, $35, whatever, they got an ounce of gold. That was the deal that we made with the world. In fact, the Federal Reserve note was really like a bond and a promise to pay a quantity of gold. And so that continued up until the late 1960s. And the problem was during the 1960s, the U.S. government really started to run large budget deficits. Not by today's standards, but by the standards back then, because we were fighting the war in Vietnam. We were fighting the war on poverty as part of the Great Society programs. We were funding the space program. The government was spending a lot of money and running deficits. And so the Fed was printing money to fund them. But we didn't have the gold. We didn't have enough gold to back up the notes. And a lot of foreign countries recognized this. And they said, we don't think America has the gold. So we're going to go get it. We're not going to hold these Federal Reserve notes. We're not going to wait for America to default. We're going to take these notes to the Federal Reserve right now and get our gold. And so that started to happen. And so all this gold started to leave the U.S. Because the world rightly didn't trust us anymore. Now, Nixon had a decision to make at that time, right? Cut back on government spending, right? Balance the budget, act fiscally responsible so that the gold doesn't keep leaving, maybe devalue the dollar, to a new lower level. So make gold more expensive because they had printed so much, allow a deflation to take place. Basically Nixon could have done the politically responsible thing, but why would he want to do that? Right. So they tried to think, how can we, continue to run these big deficits and not have to be responsible? And they said, well, let's just temporarily close the gold window. It was supposed to be temporary. Let's stop the bleeding by let's just default. Basically what they did, we're not going to let you get any gold for your dollars anymore. And so that's what he did. 1971 said, we're not going to honor these notes now.
We'll get back to the show in just a moment. But first, if you're tracking your health in a serious way, you know the problem. One app for sleep, another for nutrition, a third for fitness, a fourth for recovery. You are juggling 5 different platforms just to get an incomplete picture. That ends now with Bevel. This is the all-in-one health tracking solution that I have been waiting for, and that is why it is on my phone right now. Sleep, nutrition, habits, recovery, stress, fitness, everything consolidated in one place. What's really exciting about Bevel is that the AI is proactive. It does not just sit there waiting for you to ask questions. It analyzes your metrics in real time. It holds you accountable to your goals. It remembers your lifestyle and tailors every suggestion specifically to you. And your data stays private. Everything is stored on the device, not on servers. And if this sounds awesome, head to bevel.health/impact and use code IMPACT to try it free for an entire month. Now, let's get back to the show.
So if you have $35 or $42, because we devalued a couple of times, but if you have $42, you can't take them to the Federal Reserve and get an ounce of gold. You can't get anything, right? So if you've got $40, all we'll give you is 220s or 410s. We're not going to give you any gold. And so as a result of that, the dollar crashed during the 1970s. I mean, the dollar lost about 2/3 of its value against other fiat currencies.
What? Really?
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was that bad.
Well, I mean, yeah, it went down about 2/3 against, the mark, the franc, the yen, the pound. But against gold, that's where you really saw the loss, because it went from basically $35 an ounce at, the beginning of the decade. You needed, at the peak in 1980, you needed $850 to buy an ounce of gold. And that's why oil prices were $3 a barrel in 1970. They went to $40 a barrel in 1980. Now, a lot of people back then claimed that it was the Arab nations, right? They were the ones that were screwing us by jacking up the price of oil. But that's not what happened. We tried to screw them over by giving them paper for their oil instead of gold. And when we were paying real money, they were willing to sell us oil for $3 a barrel. But that's when it was gold. But when we tried to just give them paper that we were cranking off the printing presses, well, now they needed $40. Right? It's not their fault. We changed the rules. We debased our currency. We can't expect them not to raise their prices to compensate for that. And so one of the main reasons that so many women were working in the 80s that didn't have jobs in the 60s was because the 70s destroyed the purchasing power of their husbands' paychecks. So before the dollar collapsed, a man was able to earn enough money to support his wife and kids. But as a result of the loss of purchasing power of the dollar and higher taxes that also went along with that decade, most men could no longer support a stay-at-home wife.
Why didn't real wages go up?
Well, the real wages went down. They crashed. Nominal wages might have gone up, but the real purchasing power of those wages went down. And so now you needed a second breadwinner. Right?
But wait, why wasn't the reaction? So if I'm working at that time and I'm like, okay, the government has inflated the life out of the money supply, doing the wars, all of that. But now I'm going to put pressure on my employer to get paid more. Because that essentially is, you're just driving down what you're actually having to pay.
Yeah, people did get raises. Yes. But they didn't keep pace with the rise of the cost of living. That was the problem.
So let me get at what I'm really driving at. So right now I'm telling myself a story, and maybe I'm just wrong about this, that when I look at the data and I see the reason why real wages aren't going up right now, the answer is because we've offshored so many jobs. We've hollowed out manufacturing. So there's a certain type of worker that just doesn't even have an option to work, even if they wanted to. We've pushed everybody to get a college education, not go into the trades. And so you've got this thing where you offshored, let's say 2 to 3 million jobs. And that has made it impossible for those workers to have the kind of leverage that they would otherwise have in the job market, because if I'm an employer, I just go, oh, you're clamoring for more money? Nah, I'm just going to move my factory to China, to Mexico, to wherever. But were we already doing that in the 60s and 70s? I didn't think we were.
No, we didn't. We started doing it after that because, first of all, back in the 60s and 70s, China was still an actual communist country. So, we didn't get anything from China back then. But the reason that so much of our production got outsourced had to do with our regulatory and tax policy during the 70s and the 80s and the 90s that drove up the cost of production here in the United States and made it more attractive for companies to lower their costs by manufacturing outside the United States.
But what kept the worker from having the leverage to say, the dollar has gone down, you can't keep paying me this, you can't keep paying me the same thing?
Yeah, well, obviously, a lot of American workers didn't have the bargaining power because they would have priced themselves out of a market because there was another option. But it wasn't just the wages; it was the capital. Now? Well, you could use foreign workers. You could produce abroad, but it wasn't just the wages; it was the factories. You see, people in other countries were saving money, while Americans were just spending money. We were spending our money to buy stuff. But in China, they were saving their money so they can build the factories. Mm-hmm. And so the Chinese workers were more productive because they had the capital investments that the American workers didn't have because we didn't save as a society. And so we couldn't fund the type of investments that were being financed abroad. So places like China, they built out all the infrastructure, the factories, the supply chains in order to produce. My mother, for one time, worked in the shoe industry. And, she's retired now, but, almost all the shoes were made in the United States that we wore. But over time, factories opened up in China or Indonesia or India that could produce the shoes at a lower cost, even with shipping them across the ocean. And, businesses are under competitive pressure from the customer because I'm a customer, right? I want to buy a pair of shoes. I'm shopping around. I'm looking for the best deal. Right. And I want to buy the shoes that are the highest quality, but the lowest price. I'm going to, and if there's a company that's getting their shoes from China, and because they're bringing them in from China, they're a lot less expensive than another company that's making them in America. I'm going to buy the ones made in China.
I want to pause you for a second because I really want to understand the difference between what happened in the 70s and what's happening now. So in the 70s, is it that other countries, because it wasn't China, to your own point just a minute ago, it wasn't China that was coming out of communism and developing the goods. That happens in the 90s. But in the 70s, what it sounds like listening to you is it sounds like there were two things that were going on. One, other countries, not China, but other countries were realizing that we can import goods into the US. And so we as consumers were like, yes, please, I'm feeling strapped. I'm going to get cheaper goods from outside the US. And then the other thing is that I am putting forward, and I would love for you to attack this idea if you think that it's inaccurate, but I'll put forward that what was going on is the average person just didn't understand what was happening to them. They did not understand inflation in the way that we understand it now, certainly not the average person.
Well, we don't understand it now either. Most of them, we might, but, and the US government deliberately confuses people about inflation. The government doesn't want the public to understand what inflation is because then they would know that the government causes it. The government creates it by design. Inflation is the government's silent partner. Inflation helps solve a lot of problems for the government. It creates a lot of problems for the people, but the government doesn't want to know. That's why they've redefined inflation. The actual definition, and again, if you get an old enough Webster's dictionary, you'll read it. But inflation is an expansion of the money supply or credit. Expansion of money and credit, that's inflation. Because what's being inflated is the money supply. Because the word inflate means to expand. That's what inflate is. You don't expand a price. Prices go up and down. They don't inflate. It's the money supply that inflates. Now, deflation is a contraction of the money supply. Now, when you expand the money supply, a result of that is that prices go up. So whenever the government creates inflation, prices end up going up. Now, what the government wants to do is call the prices going up inflation and not the expansion of the money supply. And the reason is now the government can blame whoever's raising the prices. So, why are prices up? Because greedy businessmen raised the prices. They're exploiting you. They're taking advantage of you. Or greedy labor unions demanded higher wages. Or speculators drove up prices. Or Putin or whatever. They can always blame whoever's raising the price. But prices are raised because of the inflation that the government has created that results in prices going up. So they're not honest. And then they come up with these gimmicks like the CPI that are supposed to measure inflation based on the impact on prices. Yet the methodology is so flawed by design that if prices go up 10%, the CPI says they're up 4%. Right? So if you just look at the CPI, you have no clue as what's actually happening to prices. Right? Prices are rising at least twice as much as the government will admit with their doctored statistics.
We'll get back to the show in just a moment. But first, let's talk about the hidden cost of DIY when you're running a business. Most founders think they're saving money by piecing together their own financial system, But that DIY approach isn't saving you money. It's costing you money. Every hour you spend switching between systems is an hour not spent growing your business. Found consolidates everything into one business banking platform. Expense tracking, invoice management, tax preparation, virtual cards for different spending goals, all in one place. Open a Found account today for free at found.com. Found is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services are provided by Lead Bank, member FDIC. Don't put this one off. Join thousands of small business owners who have streamlined their finances with Found. This is a paid advertisement. And now let's get back to the show. Okay, so we've got internationally, people are moving away from the dollar. How far does that go, given that there was no announcement? Are we at the beginning of something where they already have enough impetus that they're just going to keep drawing down, presumably into gold, into stocks, so that they are not carrying anything in USD? Or will something have to keep ratcheting up for them to keep drawing down?
Well, I think right now it's kind of a gradual process. It's maybe speeding up a bit, but foreign central banks are moving out of dollars. They're moving out of treasuries or mortgage-backed securities, and they're moving into gold. Gold is the replacement asset for the dollar. That's
Meaning
what you're seeing.
That's going to be the new reserve currency.
It's the reserve asset. It's not a currency. Gold is money. And, before the dollar became the reserve currency, gold was the reserve for every currency, including the U.S. dollar. And when the U.S. dollar originally became the world's reserve currency, it was backed by gold. And so, in effect, the world was still on a gold standard just through the dollar. And the dollar was as good as gold, or at least that's what people thought until we defaulted. It's only been since 1971, really, that we've had a monetary system without any money, right? We've had fiat currencies backed by a fiat currency. Now, of course, central banks have always had some gold, right, as reserve. And the countries that had the most gold were the old established countries, Germany, France, right? They have a lot of gold, right? The emerging economies like a China or an India, they had almost all dollars. They hardly had any gold, right? Those are the countries now that are buying the most gold because they want to reconstitute their reserves to be more heavily into gold and less dollars. But the significance of this is that as the dollar goes down, which it's going to lose purchasing power, everything that Americans buy is going to be a lot more expensive because, we're going to have to pay a lot more dollars to pay for things. And our interest rates are going to go up a lot because what foreigners have been doing is they sell us goods that we didn't produce. And now we get to consume stuff. And then they take the money that we paid and they lend it right back to us by buying government bonds or mortgage-backed securities. And so Americans won twice, at least initially. We got cheap goods we didn't have to make, and we got to borrow money that nobody saved. And those artificially low interest rates also caused stock prices to go up, real estate prices to go up. So on paper, right, we're getting richer. All of our assets are going up. But in reality, we're getting poorer because our debts are going up. We're borrowing more and more money from the rest of the world so we can continue to consume and live beyond our means. But the world is now going to pull the rug out from under us because they're moving away from this system. And the irony of it is we chased them away, right? It's not like they did this on their own. First, it was Biden who said, who sanctioned Russia and sent a wake-up call to everybody that you got to get out of dollars or you could be next, right? We can yank your dollars away whenever we want if you do something we don't like. But then Trump comes in and not only signs on to the big, beautiful bill, which was a disaster of deficit spending, and lets our creditors know we're never going to get our house in order because even the Republicans won't cut government spending. They're going to increase it. But then he vilified the world and imposed all of these tariffs to make it even more expensive for Americans to buy the goods that the world is selling us to get our dollars. And then he beats up the Fed and says you need to slash interest rates. We need 1% interest rates or 0% interest rates when inflation is already rising. But he's also destroying the perception of Fed independence. So all of our credibility has been destroyed. We have no fiscal responsibility credibility, no independent Fed monetary policy credibility. We've already screwed over people with sanctions. So there's no reason for the world to continue with this dynamic. And so I think the whole thing is coming to an end. And it's slow now, but it's going to speed up. Right now, the strength in gold has not bled into the foreign exchange market. So the dollar relative to the euro or the pound or the yen has been relatively stable these last few months. I think that's going to change. Probably by the end of the year or next year, we're going to really see the dollar start to come down, and that's going to really push up import prices. And so the CPI is really going to start to blow up in a big way.
What do you think is going to cause that? Because given that other countries have also been inflating their money supply, I get why the dollar is relatively stable compared to everybody else. So what do you see happening that will cause
the dollar is going to go down against those other currencies. And so the price of everything we buy is going to go up because, everything's going to be more expensive. What I'm asking is what's
going to happen that's going to cause the dollar to go down relative to other fiat currencies that also have their own problems?
Yeah, it's going to be the holders of dollars selling them and buying back their local currency. So people in Europe are going to sell back their dollars to buy back their euros, right? They don't want their dollars anymore. And also the global performance, like the U.S. stock market is one of the worst performing stock markets year to date, especially in, if you adjust it for currencies. Like, for example, we have a fund that we manage at Europe Pacific Asset Management. It's a global dividend payers fund, Europe Pacific Dividend Payers Fund, and we have a separately managed strategy. And that strategy is up almost 50% in U.S. dollars year to date. And triple the return on the U.S. stock market. And the U.S. stock market is very expensive relative to the rest of the world. So I think what's going to be happening.
What are you guys invested in? Sorry, that you're getting
dividend paying stocks. A pretty
and people
diversified
just feel
portfolio.
So safe in that those are climbing in value.
Well, yeah, they're good. People are putting money into those stocks and taking money out of U.S. stocks. But I think that trend is going to
dividend paying stock is not a growth stock. So I would only expect people to go into that if they're they just prioritize cash flow, but that doesn't explain the sudden jump. And safety, though.
Well, let's say the dividend payer stock is very cheap, and the price can go up because more people want those dividends, and now the price of those stocks has gone up. And of course, a lot of the stocks that pay dividends have rising earnings. It's not like they don't grow their earnings; they grow their earnings and pay dividends. So you still get appreciation in the share price. You also get the currency appreciation. A good chunk of the gain on foreign stocks has to do with foreign exchange. As the dollar goes down, the price of foreign stocks in dollar terms goes up. So I think you're going to see, Europeans and Asians who are getting out of U.S. stocks, then selling their U.S. dollars to get back their local currencies to invest locally.
Hold on one sec. That hypothesis makes the prediction that people trust their local currency more than the U.S. Do you think that's just because the debt spiral is going to continue?
Yeah, and also, just because they're bringing their money home, right? They're going to repatriate it. I mean, if they bought U.S. stocks, they didn't necessarily want U.S. dollars. They wanted to buy a U.S. stock. But when they sell the U.S. stock, they want their local currency back, and that's what they're going to get. But also with bonds, some of the biggest selling is going to be in U.S. bonds. People around the world, governments and private citizens who own U.S. treasuries, U.S. mortgage-backed securities, they're going to get rid of those because they're losing on the foreign exchange. The interest isn't high enough to offset what they're losing. So they're going to be selling their U.S. bonds and then converting those dollars back to their own currency. And that's going to put downward pressure. But of course, the other problem is as the U.S. economy goes into recession as a result of rising inflation, right, stagflation, what does the Fed do? Prints more money. We need economic stimulus. And they throw gasoline on the fire. They accelerate the flight out of the dollar. into foreign currencies, into hard assets. And, the U.S. dollar is the reserve currency. And so if the U.S. dollar is going to lose that status to gold, that is a unique problem that America is going to deal with, because no other country is going to be losing reserve currency status, because no other currency has that status to begin with. And that status has been responsible for our entire way of life. It's the reason that we can consume so much. It's the reason that we don't have to save very much. And so that whole thing is going to be knocked out from under us. And we've built up this entire economy that is based on that. And if you take away the foundation of a, credit-fueled, consumer-based economy, then that whole economy that's been erected on that foundation collapses. And that's what we're looking at, a complete economic collapse, much worse than the '08 financial crisis. And the bigger difference is there is no way the government can bail us out, because the reason that the government was able to bail out, in 2008 is because people still wanted dollars. People still wanted treasuries. So the government could print money and, buy up toxic mortgages and send out stimulus checks. And, it worked in a sense. I mean, it didn't really work. It made the problem worse, but it arrested the immediate problem. But when they try to do that again, it's going to backfire, because the printing of the money is just going to drive the dollar even lower, and inflation is going to soar. And the stimulus is going to be a massive sedative.
All right. So what becomes the unfolding of events? How do we respond to that? We've got the debt spiral going. More and more people are going to pull out. That's going to make it impossible for people to get their debt-fueled life going. So that's going to start to dry up. What happens? When do people stop being able to make payments? What does that look like?
Well, what we need to do, what we should do in response to this, is the responsible thing, which would be massive cuts in government spending, higher interest rates, and to allow companies to fail, banks to fail, and not have any government bailouts. It would be very difficult. It would be very unpopular and painful, but it would be the right thing, right? Now, that's not going to happen, right? Because, Nixon had the choice of doing the right thing or the wrong thing, and he did the wrong thing. I mean, when given the choice of doing the right thing or the wrong thing, the politicians always choose the wrong thing, because they're always looking at it from a politically expedient perspective. Like, how do we make the pain a little bit less today? Who cares about tomorrow? I just care about the election that's coming up, right? And so, we're going to, just try to print money and create government programs. And maybe we're going to have price controls, national price controls. They'll try to stop prices from rising by making it illegal to raise prices. There may be foreign exchange controls to prevent Americans from converting their dollars into other currencies. Who knows what they're going to try to do to stop the bleeding, but none of it is going to work, because the underlying wound that we're bleeding from is going to just keep getting worse as they're trying to, put on all these Band-Aids without getting to the root wound that's underneath.
Do you think I oversimplify it to say that the underlying wound, just to be very specific, is debt?
Well, debt is the consequence of the fact that we don't save enough and we don't produce enough. And we don't do that because of our reckless monetary and fiscal policy that we've been pursuing. But the reason we've been able to pursue it for as long as we have is because of the reserve status of the dollar. So we've been able to get away with it. We've been able to kick the can down the road for generations now.
And just to be clear, because I want people to be able to follow the mechanism here, the way we've been able to get away with it is we can always issue new debt. There's always more debt to cover the old debt. And so never a problem. Just keep printing money to cover the debt. People will buy the debt because they want our dollars. As soon as that stops, we can no longer issue new debt to cover the old debt. We can no longer issue debt to make the interest payments. And so you find yourself with, there actually is no more source of magic money.
Yeah, we've been creating inflation and then exporting it. We export our paper. We import real goods that we don't produce. And then we borrow the money back from the people who have vendor financed the stuff that we bought. We've been riding on the global gravy train. Trump has it backwards. He believes that the world's been ripping us off. We've been ripping them off. You know, we've conned them into giving us all their stuff for just paper. Right? And this is the system that is going to collapse. And I think, you know, this is going to be very liberating for the rest of the world. I mean, when Trump talked about Liberation Day, he wasn't liberating Americans. He's liberating the world from having to support Americans. So the world is going to see an improvement in their standard of living because now the world's going to have a lot more stuff to consume and a lot more money to invest and borrow for themselves, right? They're not going to be shipping all the production to America, and they're not going to be lending us all their savings. So they're going to retain the goods and the savings for themselves to make their own lives better instead of making our lives better. So this is going to be a rude awakening for Americans. Nobody seems to understand this in Washington. I mean, the current administration, unless they're all just a bunch of liars, they're completely clueless. And everything that they're going to do as a result of what's going to happen is going to make what's going to happen worse.
Okay, so what should somebody who believes in everything that you're saying, what should they be doing right now? Is gold just going to keep going up and just dollar cost average into gold, or is there another play?
Yeah, well, first of all, everybody needs to own gold and silver. I mean, I've been saying this for 20 years. When I first started buying gold for my clients, it was under $300 an ounce. Silver was $4.50 an ounce, right? So both are up more than 10x, right? Gold and silver have beaten the stock market over, the last 25 years. In fact, 26 years ago, in 1999, that was the all-time record high for the U.S. stock market. The Dow Jones was worth 45 ounces of gold. It's now worth 11.
Whoa.
It's a 75% decline in terms of real money over 26 years.
Peter, is there anywhere that you can go to find that data fast? Like, is there a tracker that shows this is the average house price compared to gold? This is the stock market compared to gold.
You could plug it in because, you know where gold was and you know where houses were. Just, run the charts. I mean, everything is cheaper. The government wants you to believe that prices go up every year, only in their inflated currency. In real money, stuff gets cheaper every year. That's how it works. And, when we were on a gold standard between 1800 and 1900, that 100-year period, consumer prices were cut in half. So stuff was half the price in 1900 as it was in 1800 because we had real money. We had honest money during the 19th century. Now prices go up because we have fake money. We have funny money. But if you go back and price stuff in real money, you'll see that prices have been coming down. And that's the beauty of capitalism. We find better ways to make stuff cheaper.
This is one thing that drives me crazy. When I try to get people to understand that when the Fed says inflation is 2%, they mean they've gobbled through all of the innovation-led deflation. I know it's not technically deflation, but the innovation-led reduction in cost of something plus 2%. And it's ridiculous for the Fed to say that we need prices to go up. Why? What? It doesn't make any sense when you examine it. Like, do you want food to be more expensive or less expensive? Right? Do you want a college education that costs more or costs less? Right? When you go to the gas station, are you happy when the gas price is up or are you happy when it's down? Right? We all want lower prices. Lower prices are good for everybody, including the business. Businesses are always trying to find ways to lower their prices. Why do you think they have sales? Because they know if they can lower their price, they'll sell more stuff, right? Because people can buy more if the price is low. It was idiotic for the Federal Reserve to claim that the key to prosperity is to make sure that prices go up every year. That is nonsense. The only reason they invented this BS about 2% inflation was because we were lower than 2%, the way they measured it, and they wanted an excuse to print money and stimulate the stock market and artificially goose the economy. So they came up with this nonsense that their mandate was to have 2% inflation, which was never their mandate. Their only mandate was price stability, which means no inflation. But even falling prices is better than stable prices. Why prevent prices from going down? Why deny people
the benefits. Imagine if they did that in specific industries. Computer prices can't come down. Cell phone prices can't come down. If that was the case, nobody would own cell phones. They'd still be too expensive for most people to buy them. The only reason that everybody owns one now is because the price came way down, right? What was wrong with that? Cell phone companies that make cell phones make a lot more money now selling cell phones for a few $100s a phone than when they were $5,000 a phone. And when they were $5,000 a phone, that's how much a car cost. And so the price came way down, and everybody benefits from low prices. But prices now, though, are going to soar because this game is over. We're not going to be able to, export our inflation. All the money that we're printing is going to stay here, and a lot of the money that we printed and sent abroad is going to come back here. So all these dollars that have been circulating around the world and that have been invested in U.S. assets are going to come back here and be spent. And so they're just going to drive up prices for everything. A lot of our used car prices are going to soar. Why? Because Asians are going to come buy used cars, right? They'll just start buying cars and bringing them back to China, right? Because they'll be cheap here because our currency is going to collapse. And so now they'll be able to buy up all this stuff. And so the prices go up because now you have foreigners coming in, buying whatever's not nailed down.
Yeah, for anybody listening, that you're saying that's the exact reason that the collapse of the dollar will be good for the rest of the world is now we're not able to mop up all of their goods. And so that's going to be released into their own country where they'll finally be able to compete with us from.
You see, Donald Trump, he keeps saying that Americans are so important to the world because we consume everything. Well, we're lucky that we get to consume. The key is production. You can't consume something that hasn't been produced. So the real economic drivers, right? When Trump says that China doesn't have the cards, they've got all the cards. We got nothing. They've got the factories. They've got the savings. They've got the production. Yes, we have the customers only because of the exchange rate of the dollar. Collapse the dollar, allow other currencies to go up, and now the rest of the world is rich, and now the rest of the world can afford to buy everything. It's now Americans who are broke and can't afford to buy because the dollar has gone down. And I've always argued that the world will be better off consuming their own production rather than letting Americans consume it. And we're obviously much worse off. We can print all the money we want, but if there's nothing to buy, what good is it? Right. So this is going to be, a game changer. But, the government is going to try to do what worked in 2008 and 2020, and it never really worked. It just let us kick the can down the road, but we've run out of road, right? We can't do it anymore. And that's what gold is telling you. So that's why I said, look, people have to get into gold and silver now. Don't think it's expensive. And, Jamie Dimon, just today I read a quote. Jamie Dimon said he thinks gold can easily go to 10,000, which, it can go a lot higher than that. But
that is catastrophic.
Yeah,
I get it if you own gold.
But
it's wonderful.
But here's what Jamie Dimon said. He said for the first time in his career, it's not completely crazy to have some money in gold, right? Now, it's never been completely crazy. In fact, it's been totally sane. Jamie Dimon just didn't understand why. Like when guys like me were telling people to buy gold when it was 300, 400, 500, 1,000, right? It was because we understood what was coming.
Yeah.
Jamie Dimon didn't get it until just now. Now he's starting to worry about the stuff that I've been worried about for 20 years. Now Dimon is finally worried about it. But now more people on Wall Street are starting to worry about what they should have been worrying about all along. The problem is now we're so far down this rabbit hole, there's no way out of it, right? So it's, when I first started talking about this, it was early enough to do something to prevent the crisis. Now, all you can do is, buckle up, right? The crash is coming. You got to buy gold. You got to buy silver. People should go to Schiff Gold. In fact, I tell people now when I do interviews, if you're watching this interview, don't even wait till the end. put it on pause, go to Schiff Gold, and buy some gold and silver. Because if you wait till the end of the interview, it'll be more expensive. So just go in there and buy it now and have some real money. And then, you know, also, I think people should be investing in foreign stocks, gold stocks. I mean, gold stocks, you know, have more than doubled this year. I have stocks I own that have tripled and quadrupled, but they're still cheap. You know, this is just the beginning. Hardly anybody owns these stocks and hardly anybody owns gold. We are at the very early stages of what is going to be a generational bull market in gold and silver and these mining stocks. This is really the first year of the bull market, you know, but it's not going to end in 1 year. It's going to last, I think, for the rest of the decade and probably most of the next.
Damn. All right. If Jamie Dimon is calling 10K believable, what is your upper bound believable number for gold?
Well, look, there is no upper bound because there's no lower bound to the dollar. I mean, the dollar could be worth nothing, in which case the price of gold is infinity. If the dollar is worth zero, yeah, no matter how many dollars somebody offers you, you won't give them any gold. Now, you know, as far as where I think it's going, I think that gold is going to be worth, at a minimum, half of the Dow Jones at some point. So I mentioned that the Dow was at 45 ounces of gold in 1999, and now it's 11. So I think it's going to be down to 2. You know, probably maybe lower, but let's just call it 2. Right. So where would that be? Well, if the Dow went to 20,000 and gold went to 10,000, that would do it. But, you know, that would be a big bear market. The Dow's like 46,000. So it has a long way to fall. Let's say the Dow goes to 50,000. Well, now gold has to go to 25,000. And now you got 2 to 1, right? So that could be, you know, a way it happens. Or the Dow goes to 40,000, right? And gold's 20,000. Or yeah, it was 25,000.
Why would, if the companies are still doing fine, why would the Dow drop so much? Is it that you think this downward spiral of the dollar is going to cause the companies to start having trouble?
Well, if you look at the last 2 major declines in U.S. stocks, they ended with the Dow and gold at 1 to 1. That was 1932 and 1980, right? At both of those major stock market bottoms, you could buy the Dow for about an ounce of gold. So I'm not saying that the Dow should be worth 2 ounces of gold. I think it would be cheap at 2 ounces of gold. I'd be happy to buy the Dow at 2 ounces of gold. I'm just saying that if we get the type of decline that I think, that is, the Dow's going to get very cheap. It's not going to, the bottom of this bear market, it's not going to be fair value. Stocks are going to get ridiculously cheap at the bottom, just like they're ridiculously expensive at the top. But, you know, depending on how much money we print, I mean, if we were to go back on a gold standard, I think you'd probably have to have $20,000 or $30,000 gold at this point to make it work based on how much debt we have and how many dollars are out there. And I do think the world is right now going back on the gold standard without us, right? I think foreign central banks are, going to be backing their currencies predominantly with gold. They may not make them convertible into gold, but their primary asset that they will hold to defend the value of their currency will be gold, not U.S. dollars. And what that means is they're not buying any more treasuries. And you know who else is not buying treasuries anymore? Maybe Americans. Morgan Stanley, just a couple of weeks ago, their strategist said that we should recommend, instead of a 60-40 portfolio, 60% stocks, 40% bonds, 60-20-20. 60% stocks, 20% bonds, 20% gold, which is a sell signal on bonds. Sell half your bonds and buy gold. Now, if Wall Street does that, if the average American who has a 60-40 portfolio makes it into a 60-20-20 portfolio, I mean, that means Americans are going to go on a selling spree, getting rid of their bonds and just buying gold. So how is the U.S. government going to finance these massive deficits if nobody wants to buy the debt they're selling? That's the problem. That's why the Fed is going to crank up the presses and do massive QE. But that's just massive inflation. That's just throwing gasoline on this bonfire.
Yeah, the exact thing that I've been trying to get people to hear is that every country, with the exception of Japan, that has crossed 130% debt to GDP, tears itself apart from the inside. You end up with civil war or revolution. People always think that I'm being hyperbolic or I'm just being paranoid. But the reality is, when you start describing the mechanisms that would have to be in place for these kind of drawdowns to happen, you're not able to fund a bunch of programs. So you literally have to go into the government and say, well, these things just aren't going to get paid. Checks start bouncing. You just run into the realities of what happens when you can't do funny money, essentially.
Yeah.
And that is going to get bad. And then you're going to take the populism that we have now and you're going to exacerbate it 1,000-fold. And that's when suddenly the left and the right go from hating each other to actually killing each other.
Yeah. And this responsible thing is for the government to admit that it's broke and that it can't afford the promises that it's made, and to cut government spending, including entitlements, to be honest with the voters and say, we can't pay you the Social Security benefits that we promised. So we're not going to. We're going to maybe we're going to make the retirement age 85 instead of 65, right? You got to keep working. Unfortunately, we told you could retire at 65, but we don't have the money. There's a lot of things that America should do, but we're not going to do that. So instead, we're going to create massive inflation so that the Social Security payments are worthless. So, my solution is means testing it so that at least the poorest people who really need Social Security could get something. And wealthy people, like I don't need any Social Security. You could simply say, Peter, you get nothing. I don't need the money, right? And so the more people who you tell you get nothing, then the people that really need it will get something. But the way they're going to do it, they're just going to wipe out benefits so that my loss is the same as everybody else's loss, because it's all going to be inflation. And this is the worst way to deal with it. But politically, that's what we're going to do. We're going to destroy the value of Social Security by destroying the value of the money. And so, yes, you're going to get your Social Security check, but good luck buying something with it. What good is a Social Security check that doesn't buy anything, right? So, but the politicians are never going to act responsibly. But also, I got to throw this out there because I know a lot of people are watching and they're listening to this and they say, yeah, that's why I own Bitcoin. I'm ready for this because I got my money in Bitcoin. I got news for the Bitcoiners. The Bitcoin crisis may hit before the dollar crisis. We could see a complete implosion in Bitcoin even before the dollar. And I think Bitcoin right
you're
now,
mapping it as a tech stock?
Well, it's not even a tech stock, because at least the tech stock is a business that has the potential to generate income. Bitcoin is nothing. It generates nothing. It has the potential to generate nothing. It's just a digital string of numbers, right? But Bitcoin is right now in a big bear market, and nobody knows. It's down more than 25% priced in gold since August. And in fact, Bitcoin was down again today, even as gold hits new highs and silver hits new highs. So I think the narrative that Bitcoin is digital gold is being disproved right now. And I think a lot of people who bought Bitcoin in the last couple of years through exchange traded funds are going to be getting out. And I think what happened on Friday in the crypto market and in Bitcoin, that flash crash, is a warning of what's about to happen. And what's going to happen next is going to be much worse. And it's not going to be triggered by a social media post. And there's not going to be a bounce back. I think you're going to see mass liquidation as people try to get out of the casino. But there's no exit. There's not enough liquidity.
You've planted your flag. I'll plant mine. We'll see who ends up being right. I've
what's
spent a
your
lot
flag?
of time. Yeah, I'll explain it now. I spent a lot of time listening to you, so I'm certainly aware of the way that you perceive this. I think the thing that people who think that Bitcoin doesn't have any value don't understand how many subcultures exist in America. And so I very much fall into the subculture of people who I look at Bitcoin as digital gold. I'm far more trusting of things that are in the digital realm than I am of something that's going to be stored in a warehouse somewhere that just feels very sort of Luddite. Now, I have a meaningful amount of my portfolio in gold, but nowhere near compared to Bitcoin. So gold is my hedge against Bitcoin, if you will, that if I end up being wrong and the world doesn't go for it, or doesn't continue to go for it, I should say, then cool, I've got gold. But I think that there is a cadre of people, largely young people, who have grown up so digitally native that they don't make the distinction that you make. Like when I hear you tout, but gold is a real thing, it has real value, that literally means nothing to me. It does not hit me. I think of gold as being totally worthless other than what somebody else will pay. So for me, it's the exact same thing with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is only worth what somebody else will pay. But I don't care about when people tout like it's used in manufacturing. I'm like, get the fuck out of here. That is not what the price is driven by. The price is driven by based off of what people will pay for it because they're using it as a store of wealth. That is what drives the price of gold.
Tom, I get what you're saying about the subculture of true believers, hardcore Bitcoin people. I mean, I know a lot of these people. I mean, I'm in this world. A lot of my friends are hardcore, diehard Bitcoin guys. So that's why my immediate forecast is not that Bitcoin goes to zero. No, I mean, there are people that are going to hold it no matter what. And there's people that will even buy more on the way down. But my point is that over the last several years, the main driver of the appreciation has not been the hardcore Bitcoiners. It's been mainstream investors who bought Bitcoin ETFs in their Schwab account or their Fidelity account.
Yeah, because number go up.
And they just bought it, because they thought it would go up and they believed all this stuff. They're not counting their Bitcoin. They're counting their dollars. They're looking on their statements. And a lot of the money that went into Bitcoin ETFs came out of gold ETFs, came out of gold stock ETFs. I saw it happening, in real time. And so this is the money that I think is going to come out of the market. I think it's the speculator who's not married to the Bitcoin philosophy, not the young kid who's 20 years old and owns it, but the retiree who bought a Bitcoin ETF in his IRA or whatever, right? But more mature people who just jumped on a bandwagon, thought it was going to be an easy money. People were going on television, $1 million Bitcoin, $5 million Bitcoin. You're an idiot if you don't own Bitcoin. You got to get in on Bitcoin. All the FOMO. A lot of people got in. I just think that a lot of those people are going to try to get out at the same time. And there's no liquidity in the Bitcoin market to absorb it. You saw what happened on Friday with some selling. What can happen? The bottom drops out. But if we get real selling, real outflows out of these Bitcoin ETFs, and then also out of these Bitcoin treasury companies that are going to be dumping. I mean, you have so much speculative money that is in Bitcoin. But then also, I think a lot of the diehards have leveraged their Bitcoin. I think a lot of people have 6-7 figure Bitcoin wallets who have borrowed money against it.
Yeah, that's
wild. And those loans are going to get called. And this is just going to be an implosion. So Bitcoin doesn't have to go from 110,000 to zero. What if it goes from 110,000 to 10,000? That is a huge loss. That is a massive amount of people's wealth just wiped out of existence that they thought they had. This is what I think is coming in Bitcoin. Now, you could argue long term, maybe it'll survive. Maybe it'll have another lease on life. But there is a massive crash. And I wouldn't even consider buying Bitcoin until after MicroStrategy is bankrupt and all their Bitcoin is sold, right? Because that is going to happen. That is an event that is inevitable.
Peter. Yeah, look, I have a lot of admiration for the size of Michael Saylor's testicles. They are clearly gigantic. I would not be able to sleep doing that, but we'll see. But on that one, so I'll give you one quick story, and then there's some other questions I have for you. But there was a Japanese comic book company called Shonen Jump that made a decision back in the 90s where the U.S. comic book industry decided they were going to start aging up their readers. And Shonen Jump is a Japanese company, said, are we going to age up with our readers? Or are we going to keep making stuff for kids of a specific age? And they decided to keep making things for kids of a specific age. Now that decision, because they're constantly bringing new people into their universe, that one decision has made it such that a single title of Japanese manga now outsells the entire Western comic book market. And so I see a parallel between gold, which clearly speaks to people that grew up where gold was the thing, where you stored your value in times of uncertainty. That's now being replaced with young people that just grow up where Bitcoin is just a normal thing. Like there's not a debate for them. They just grew up. It is a thing. It's very valuable. And so the frame of reference that they have is that Bitcoin is a valuable thing. And so I think you're just more and more people, and it'll never be 100%, but more and more people are going to go into crypto, into Bitcoin specifically. Now, I have the same beef that you have with speculators and gamblers, which I think crypto has a bizarre way of attracting. But anyway, I think there's just going to be a constant influx of new blood.
Part of it, though, Tom, is their frame of reference, their view of Bitcoin has been framed in this huge bull market where Bitcoin has gone from nothing to 126,000.
And if it craters, then I will be, meaning if it really goes to nothing, I'll be wrong.
I didn't say nothing. But let's say Bitcoin goes from where it is now, 110,000 down to 10,000, which 10,000 Bitcoin was a pretty high price a few years ago, right? And let's say it goes down to 10,000. That's going to skew how a lot of young people look at it, because now all of a sudden, wait a minute, it's gone down 90%. A lot of young people who bought in at 50, 60, 70,000 and have lost 80% of their money are no longer going to be so enamored by it. And a lot of other young people.
The truth of Bitcoin is it must become a commodity. If Bitcoin doesn't get commodified and it's always this highly volatile asset, then it's always going to be at risk.
But how is it going to be a commodity? So what do you use it for? What? I mean, I know what I do with
interesting.
oil.
I'm never going to be able to convince you because you know these answers. It is for someone like me. It is, where would I rather have my store of value? In Bitcoin, which I feel like I control, or in gold, which is going to sit in somebody else's vault because I'm sure as hell not burying it in my backyard. I'm not putting it in a safe in my house. Fuck that. I do not want to be a target. So there's no universe in which I'm going to custody my own gold. So at some point, I am trusting somebody else to hold it. So would I rather
you can hold it yourself. I mean, we ship gold and silver out to people all the time from Schiff Gold. But where do you lose me?
I don't want to do that.
Right. Well, okay. But you say, where do you want to store your value? The problem is there's no value in Bitcoin to store. When I'm storing gold for a jeweler who might need it. I'm storing it for, a company that makes computer chips that might need it.
You're too smart to believe that.
But that's what gold is used for. Or I'm storing it for a central banker who may need it to back their currency. Right.
Yep.
That's another.
I will give you. It stores value. And all I'm saying is Bitcoin stores value. Now,
it stores. You can't store what you don't have. Bitcoin has a price, but it doesn't have any underlying value.
So I don't know if this is going to be fruitful. So I'll take 3 minutes back and forth between you and I, and we'll see if we get anywhere. Right. The storage of value is merely a psychological construct. This is why we have used shells and glass beads and all kinds of shit, because what people realize is, as a human, I have to exist. During that time, I can try to find a way to capture my wealth. I can go hunt something. I can build a better trap. I can give somebody a back rub on the promise that they're going to go fucking get me some food, whatever. But I'm going to use my time to make sure that I survive a winter, that I survive the night, all of that. So I'm exchanging time for proof of work, which we call money. And the people that get really good at doing something super valuable with their time to get that proof of work in the form of value, they store it as a thing. That thing can be a, bro, thank you so much for the wildebeest. I'm going to feed you next time. That can be, they write that on a piece of paper. It can be a shell or a glass bead. But I now have this thing that we all agree, if you give me that thing, I'm going to exchange you something else for it.
Yeah, but the reason...
Hold on. It can be a piece of paper that we call $1. It can be some gold, which is amazing because it doesn't rot. Or it can be a Bitcoin, which is the digital version of the same fucking thing. But if you can't understand that the vast, and I know you do understand it, the vast majority of the value of gold is that we all agree, oh, gold is that thing? Cool, I'm going to do gold. But it isn't because it turns into fucking watches and stuff like that.
The reason that seashells had value is because you could wear them. It was like jewelry. They were beautiful. People liked them. But let me give you an example that is easy to understand. Cigarettes have been money. The GIs used them as money after World War II. They're used today as money in prison. Now, why cigarettes? Because people smoke cigarettes. They enjoy smoking cigarettes. Now, I may not be a smoker. I may be in prison and I don't smoke, but I still want cigarettes because there's somebody in that prison who smokes. And as long as there are smokers, cigarettes have value. If nobody wants to smoke, then they don't make good money. But you need smokers to give cigarettes value. Now,
okay, so one last thing,
Bitcoin,
because you're so
you
right.
can't smoke Bitcoin. You can't.
Yes.
You have to be smoking something to buy it, but you can't smoke it. But the thing is, there's tens of thousands of cryptos that you can own. Why Bitcoin? There's so many others that are out there. It's not like, oh, I have to buy Bitcoin. There's all these altcoins.
It's the one with momentum. So
well, then what if it doesn't have? Will it still have
hold on,
momentum?
because
if
you
it's
still
10,000?
haven't gotten to the point why it's like cigarettes. So the thing that I don't think you're being honest about, or you don't want to face, or I don't know what the fuck it is that Bitcoin is the equivalent of a cigarette that I can transfer magically to any other cell in the prison. And so would I rather have the cigarette that I have to hold in my hand, or do I want the one that I can just insta transfer to anybody without having to talk to the guards or anything like that? It just instantly goes to the thing. I can instantly get it. And that doesn't mean anything to you, but it means a lot to people like me.
Well, here's what you're missing. I'm a smoker. I'm craving a cigarette. And you send me a digital cigarette that I can't smoke, that ain't going to do it. Yeah. I need an actual cigarette that I can take a drag. I can suck in all that tobacco and the nicotine, and I can feel good. I can't do that with your digital cigarette. I need an actual cigarette.
That's great. And that's why Bitcoin is never going to soak up everything. If people think gold's going away, they're dumb. But if people think that one day everyone is going to wake up and go, wait, Bitcoin doesn't have any value, I can't smoke it, they're out of their minds. That just isn't, like, it is so self-evident to me that Bitcoin does something that right now nothing other than other sort of also ran cryptocurrencies do, that I'm like, there's nothing like this. Even USD, you've got to turn into a stable coin, and then cool, stable coin's dope. The problem is it's still owned by the government, and I trust the government exactly fuck all.
I don't look. The only stable coin that makes sense to me is one backed by gold, and then it's like a real currency. Then it's not stable. It's just it's tokenized gold. That's fine. I mean,
I will be shocked if that doesn't become a thing.
Well, it already
but you're not going to get someone like me, because I'm still like, but the underlying asset is still in someone's warehouse, and I don't trust them.
Well, why not? I mean, have you ever heard of Brinks?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so Brinks has been in business for 165 years. They're in the business of storing gold for other people and transporting gold for other people. In 165 years, not an ounce of gold has been lost. So not one Brinks customer has ever lost any gold in 165 years. So why wouldn't you trust Brinks? I mean, they've earned that over 165 years of building a reputation in a free market. Look, people buy insurance. Right? People buy life insurance, auto insurance, fire insurance. It's only as good as the third party, right? People trust third parties all the time in everything that they do, right? So you can still trust the third parties to store your gold. What I don't want to do is just trust that people believe that nothing is something. They may believe that nothing is something for now, right? There's an old saying that you could fool some of the people all the time and all the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. And, people are going to wake up about Bitcoin. And the whole thing is going to implode. But we'll see how committed people are. If we do get a real crash from these levels and Bitcoin goes down to 80 or 90%, we'll see how popular it still is. We'll see how many people still have confidence in it as a store of value when 80 or 90% of its so-called value evaporates.
We shall indeed. Peter, that was fun. Thank you. Okay, so now I want to get into the Trump of it all. Why does he want to drive interest rates down if sort of artificially low interest rates are a big part of his problem?
Yeah, well, he doesn't understand that that's the problem. He's looking at it from the point. Do you think
Besant understands?
Maybe, but he certainly does a good job of lying about it right now. And so you never know with politicians or central bankers, are they ignorant or are they just lying? I mean, I don't know. And sometimes it's hard to know what's worse, right? If they're lying or just, ignorant. But Donald Trump looks at a problem that we've got a lot of debt. And so we have a lot of debt. We need low interest rates so we don't have to default. He looks at the housing market and sees a situation where houses are so expensive and people can't afford them. And in his mind, well, how do we make these expensive houses affordable? Well, let's make mortgages cheaper so people can go borrow more money at a lower rate to buy these houses, right? But the free market solution to that problem is lower home prices. Obviously, houses are too expensive. Let the price come down, right? Then people can afford them. People won't have to borrow as much money. So the interest rate doesn't have to be that low because your loan balance is a lot lower. So your monthly payments will be lower because the principal is lower. But of course, if we let real estate prices fall, banks could fail, right? People's home equity disappears. And so Trump thinks we just need lower interest rates so we can sustain a bubble in housing. And so the U.S. government, which right now we're spending, $1.2 trillion, $1.3 trillion every year on interest. And by next year, we'll be spending $2 trillion a year, which will be, 40% of our tax revenue. And if it keeps going, it'll be more than that. And Trump understands that the economy is going to implode under the weight of all this debt. And we're going to be spending all of our money just on interest on what we've borrowed, and there's nothing left over to do anything else. So Trump says we need lower interest rates so that we can service this debt. But
isn't he right? Really, like if he can even get the interest rates down for like a month, and then he can just refinance everything.
No, he can't refinance. That's the problem, because there has to be a lender willing to lend the money at that low rate. They don't exist.
You're saying now there's just already no appetite.
Not for people will buy 30-day treasuries, maybe a 1 year, but they're not going to lend us money at 2% for 30 years or even 10 years. You can't do it. And so, but Trump just wants the Fed to lower rates so that we can borrow more money short term to get the rates down. But that's just going to make the underlying problems worse, because it's artificially low interest rates that are the source of the problem. And so, you can't cure the problem by making it bigger. But what we do need, the solution is to let interest rates go up. The way we solve the debt problem is we default. That's how we solve it, right? How does somebody, if you're an individual and you've just borrowed too much money, right, and you can't possibly pay it back, what do? You declare bankruptcy, right? And then you reduce your liabilities. You give all of your creditors a haircut, right? Hey, Peter, everybody loaned Peter Schiff a bunch of money. Peter's broke. He can't pay everybody back. Let's just go into bankruptcy. Let's figure out what Peter's got, and we'll figure out how much he can afford to pay, and then we'll figure out what everybody gets. And that is the solution that we need. We need the U.S. government to basically have a moratorium. Hey, we can't pay. We borrowed too much money. We can't pay the bondholders. We can't pay the Social Security. We can't pay the pensions on government retirees. We're basically going to have to give everybody a haircut. We're going to have to figure out, we have a $38 trillion debt. We can't afford that. Maybe we can afford a $10 trillion. We got to have a default. That is the honest way to go about doing it. Now, you might say, well, that's terrible. People that own treasuries, somebody that has $1 million in treasuries, they're only going to have $400,000. Yes, I get it. They lost $600,000. But the way we're going to do it, they're not going to default. You're going to have your $1 million worth of treasuries, but it's going to feel like $100,000 because 90% of your purchasing power is going to get wiped out through inflation. So a much better solution to the problem of too much debt is default. Right? A better solution to overpriced homes is to let the prices go down. But when you do the good solution, the pain is immediate and the outrage is immediate. People are very pissed off that they lost this money. So the government would rather have them lose more money slower than less money right away. And of course, then they can blame somebody else. They can blame, the speculators, or they can blame capitalism. They can blame greedy corporations, which of course is what they're going to do, right? The government never accepts responsibility for the problems it causes. It always blames capitalism for those problems, so it could use that to make itself bigger and to hold itself off as the solution. See, this is why we got to get rid of capitalism. This is why we need more government, because we have to prevent these disasters that capitalism creates.
All right, it's amazing that you're bringing up capitalism and people losing faith in it. The way that you first got on my radar years and years ago was you went down, you were during Occupy Wall Street, and you were like, I'm one of the 1%ers, talk to me. So when I see the rise of Mamdani, and on my live show, I end up talking about him a lot. And I'm just like, people do not understand where these kind of policies come from, nor do they understand where they go. And to me, as alarming as the rise in gold price is, seeing the rise of socialist candidates is at least as alarming, if not more so. Do you think I'm crazy about that? What do you read in the rise of the DSA, the rise of Mamdani?
Well, it's to be expected. I mean, that is an inherent flaw in democracy as a economic system. And the reason that America became so rich is because we weren't a democracy. I mean, we were created as a republic, and the goal of the republic was to keep the evil forces of democracy in check. And, we did a very good job of that for a long time. But the country is far more democratic today than it was, when it was established.
Can you be a little painstaking and explain what you mean? So what's the difference between a republic and a democracy? And what were the things that we changed that made us go away from republic and towards democracy?
Yeah. So, I mean, a very easy and kind of, definition is a democracy is two wolves and a chicken voting on what to have for dinner. A republic is a well-armed chicken who challenges the vote. So the idea behind a republic is that the majority could be just as oppressive as one person. Right. So if you're in the minority and a majority of people decide to oppress you, right, you don't really care. That's no different than having a monarch oppress you or a dictator. Right. And so you don't want to allow a group of individuals to take away the rights of a smaller group because they outnumber them. So the whole purpose of a republic is to protect the minority from the tyranny of the majority. And so how did the founding fathers, how did they do this, right? Well, from the federal government, and remember, because the U.S., America was initially a collection of 13 independent countries. So all the initial 13 colonies that became states, they all had their own constitutions and their own government. But on a federal level, right, the way the federal government was organized, it was organized in a way to be very undemocratic. So first of all, the president was not elected by the people. The president was elected by the Electoral College. And the Electoral College, there were various ways to, get the electors other than just popular votes. But it wasn't the people who were voting for the president. It was the people who were voting for electors who were supposed to convene and make decisions and evaluate the candidates and then vote. They weren't supposed to be a rubber stamp of what the people wanted. They were elected to exercise their own judgment. The senators were appointed by the state legislators. They were not elected by anybody. They were appointed by state legislators. Now, those state legislators may have been elected, but the senators were appointed. And they were appointed for 6-year terms, and their terms were staggered. And the reason that they were staggered so that only 1/3 of the Senate would, turn over was because they wanted to make sure that if there was a popular movement, that at most it could capture 1/3 of the Senate, that it couldn't, it couldn't turn the whole Senate over. They wanted it to be a slower movement in case, there was some crazy idea that became popular. It couldn't take over the whole Senate. There was one body that was elected by the people, and that was the House of Representatives, and they were elected every 2 years. And they entrusted the House with the ability to raise taxes, not the Senate. They wanted the House to vote for taxes because they were accountable to the people, because every 2 years they had to go run for re-election, and it would be hard if they had just raised everybody's taxes. But the Constitution also was written in a way to dramatically limit the power of the federal government, because the federal government can only do the specific things that are authorized to it by the Constitution. The states can do whatever they want so long as it's not denied by the Constitution. but the federal government could only do the few things that the Constitution specifically says they can do. And there's very little that the federal government can actually do. 90+% of what the federal government does today is completely unconstitutional. So,
great.
So the Constitution was written to prevent the government from doing all the things that people wanted to do. It wasn't allowed to do it. And then, of course, voting was restricted, right? The states determined who could vote. And the states had all kinds of restrictions. You had to be 21 in most states, right? And 21, back in 1792 was a lot different than 21 today. A 21-year-old back then probably had been married for 4 or 5 years, had a couple of kids, and had been out of school since he was 10, right? So people that were in the real world. You were a lot more mature in life at 21. Most 21-year-olds today have never had a job, and they still live with their parents, right? So, it's very different than a 21-year-old back then. But, of course, they had poll taxes. You had to pay a tax to vote, or you had to own property to vote. They had literacy tests. Women couldn't vote. Not that I would necessarily have that restriction today, but the reason women didn't vote is because they didn't really work. They stayed at home. They took care of the kids. So it was assumed that, they weren't as up on the issues and they wouldn't make as an informed vote as the men. But the whole idea was not that everybody votes. The idea was that we had good government. And if you notice, if you read the Constitution, if you read the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, there's nothing about voting being a right. We have a right to speech, to own property. We have a right to freedom of religion. There is no right to vote. There's nothing in the Constitution until we got the amendments that said, the right to vote shall not be denied if you're on account of sex or if you're not 18. But in the original founding documents of the United States, voting was not a right. Voting was a privilege. And the whole idea was to limit voting because the majority is normally wrong, right? And about everything. If you just decide stuff based on popular opinion, you're pretty much going to do the wrong thing every time, right? It's rare that the majority is right about anything. And so you don't want to run a country based on the whims of the majority. And, the founding fathers, called it mobocracy. That's how they defined democracy. They didn't like it. They had studied the democracies going back to ancient Greece where the concept originated, and they were all failures because the people vote themselves broke. And, we're repeating that now. And that's what's going on in New York. The promise of socialism is very seductive, right? Even though it's failed everywhere it's been tried, that doesn't prevent people from thinking that this time it's different, that we have better people. We have more caring people. Yes, it didn't work in Cuba. It didn't work in Venezuela. It didn't work in the Soviet Union, but it's going to work in New York. Right? We're going to do it. Right. And it's very easy to be a demagogue and to say you're poor because this person is exploiting you. Right. This rich person is the reason you're poor. And let's just take money away from him. Right. If we just take money from this rich person, you can have free health care. You can have free transportation. You can have cheaper food. You can have cheaper rent. And I'm like, OK, yeah. But they don't understand that none of this stuff is going to work, that all this stuff is going to backfire, right? That everything the socialist promises, the opposite is what's going to get delivered. It's an empty promise, but it sounds good, but it's not an accident or that people like it. And the worse you can make the economic conditions, the more susceptible they are to believe this kind of stuff. And look at what happens. Look at the rise. And not that I'm, when you bring up the Nazis, but it's when you look at how did Adolf Hitler rise to power as on the top of the National Socialist Workers' Party, which is what the Nazi Party was. It was a socialist party. It was a workers' socialist party. It was because Germany was a mess economically. They had just had hyperinflation from the Weimar Republic, right? They had lost the First World War. They were trapped under the onerous terms of the Treaty of Versailles. So there were a lot of problems. And that was a fertile environment for a guy like Adolf Hitler to come into power. I mean, if everything was great in Germany, he never could have risen to power. But he was voted into power, democratically elected. He didn't take over by a violent revolution. He was voted in. The Nazi Party was voted into power, right? So that's what can happen, right? When people are voting, and especially when they're voting when times are tough, and times are going to get very tough. I mean, they're tough now. They're going to be a lot tougher soon.
Yeah, that's a thing that really worries me, is because people do not understand the cause and effect of economies. They get in a position where times really are tough. Things really are as hard as they think they are. And then they vote for the exact economic style that will exacerbate the problem 1,000-fold. And by freezing rents, you end up getting the Bronx basically in the 70s and 80s, where many landlords realized, it's much more cost efficient to burn the building down and collect the insurance than it is to try to upkeep the building, given that they're making it impossible for me to collect enough rent that I can upkeep it. They're looking at the landlords like they're slumlords. And it's like, well, if you've got an asset that makes less money than it costs to upkeep, now you're literally asking for charity. So there's no way they're going to do it. They're going to find a way out of that. And given that not only have we tried it, we've tried it in New York recently. Like, I was alive when that was happening. And so that one to me is just, as somebody who I really feel like young people have been done super dirty by the accumulation of debt, by deficit spending, by printing money, just eating them alive with inflation. To your point, the government does not want people to know what inflation is. And they keep voting for things that make it worse. It is just, and I don't know what words to yell into the void to get people to understand that, okay, listen, this is going to be hard. Nobody's going to have a good time, but at least it doesn't get catastrophic if I lean more on the Ray Dalio beautiful deleveraging side, where it's not just pure default, but it's partial default. It's partial additional tax on the wealthy, especially. It's partial redistribution. It's a little bit of money printing, but all sort of in.
Yeah, the problem, though, with taxing the wealthy is it doesn't diminish what they spend. It diminishes what they save and invest. So that's the problem, because we need investment capital. We need that. And so to the extent that we're taxing the wealthy, it needs to be a consumption-based tax, not a tax on their wealth or their assets, but a tax on when they buy luxury goods. You could tax that. But the other problem with democracy, right, is you have so many voters that have been bought and paid for. Once the government can make you dependent on a government check, right? That's why the government loves to cripple you, so they can give you a crutch that you're now dependent on. And now you vote for whoever promises to continue providing the crutch. And if anybody threatens to take it away, you're going to vote against them. So you have all these people now that get welfare checks, housing vouchers, Social Security checks, SNAP benefits from the government. And so they're going to keep voting to keep getting those benefits. And there are all sorts of government subsidies, too, where the people who benefit from government, even if they also suffer, from the same government, but when you get money from the government, that you've got it, right? So, and the people who are benefiting from government subsidies or programs can organize together to keep those programs. But the taxpayers who pay the bills, they're not in an organized group. They don't necessarily know. Or even if it's not a tax, even if it's a law or a regulation that artificially increases prices so that certain people can get a windfall at the expense of others, the average American doesn't even realize that he's getting screwed or why they're getting screwed. But the people who are benefiting know exactly why they're benefiting, and they give money to the politicians who continue to perpetuate those benefits. So the people who benefit from government are organized and they vote and they contribute. But everybody who pays the cost, whether it's through taxes or inflation or whatever, they don't know. They're diffused. And so you end up constantly reelecting the politicians that perpetuate the system that is impoverishing the majority of people who don't know it and who aren't organized. That's why, when you think about voting criteria. I would rather live in a country where I can't vote, but I have confidence in those who can, right? So, whereas if everybody can vote, like, I say, hey, let's raise the voting age to 30, right? And there are going to be some young people who are very competent and probably could cast a well-informed, good vote. And let's say I'm one of them. Let's say I'm 21 and I'm going to make an intelligent vote. I would still be in favor of raising the voting age to 30, even though it means that I can't vote, because it means that all the other idiots who are my age, they can't vote either. Because what good is it if I go to vote and then 10 other people cancel out my vote with their moronic vote, right? I would rather have responsible people voting, so I have good government, than a bunch of irresponsible people canceling out my vote, right? And everybody should, feel the same way about it. I mean, it's not about voting, right? It's about having good government. And good government is limited government, small government, government that stays out of the way, right? That allows maximum individual freedom. That's what we want from government. The government that governs best governs least. And that was, I think it was maybe Thomas Jefferson or Ben Franklin, I forget, but it was one of the founding fathers who said that. And it's one of the most appropriate quotes.
How do you stop corporate greed, though, from taking advantage of people?
I love corporate greed, because corporate greed is what makes my life better, right? When corporations are greedy, they want to earn more money. How do they earn more money? Provide me with a product or a service that I want to buy at a price that's lower and a quality that's higher than somebody else. So greed, right, when it's channeled into profit maximization, is a good thing, right? Fine. Now, if you're talking about, well, what about a corporation that is stealing from me or defrauding me? Okay, well, we have laws against that.
You or giving you things
we
you
have
don't
laws
need.
against that. Look, I can't steal your money. I can't go into your house and steal your money, right? And a corporation can't do that either. I can't defraud you, and neither can a corporation. But a corporation, if they just earn your money honestly, right, then that's fine.
Yeah, but think of things like Roundup and stuff like that, where people know, like, these guys have a sense that this is creating a problem, but they're just like, fuck it. Like, it's a cost of doing business.
But look at what happened to Monsanto, which unfortunately got bought by Bayer, who had nothing to do with Monsanto or Roundup. They sold the company to Germans, and now they've been paying out billions and billions of dollars in claims. So, the market is doing something about that, and yeah, I mean, yes, I think that, like all these cigarette companies, to the extent that they knew cigarettes were harmful and they didn't tell people that they were harmful. Although, I mean, come on. I mean, it's hard to believe that you could suck all that into your lungs and not think you're doing some damage, right? I mean, it should have gone like obvious that smoking cigarettes is not a good thing if you're concerned about your health and your longevity. But obviously now everybody knows that cigarettes are bad for you. And if you want to smoke them, then that's on you, right? I mean, they got warnings all over the packaging. There's all, if you smoke cigarettes today, you've made that choice. And that's what freedom is about. It's about the ability to make choices. Some of those choices are going to be good. Some of those choices are going to be bad. There are some people that think, you know what? I know that I might not live as long smoking cigarettes, but I get so much pleasure from cigarettes. And I'm not a smoker and I've never smoked, but you talk to smokers and how much enjoyment they get, how much they look forward to and like cigarette smoking. I mean, it doesn't even make any sense to me. And I have no interest in trying to pick up the habit just so I can experience it. But for some people, they'd rather live a shorter life and enjoy smoking. That's their choice,
Yeah, no doubt. What's the most controversial belief that you have around this kind of thing, economics, government, et cetera?
I mean, a lot of the things I believe are controversial. Like one of the things
I've been noticing that for the last 10 minutes. That's what made me ask.
Now, I mean, look, to say that I'm not in favor of democracy, right? People think, oh, everybody should vote. Why? So we can have lousy presidents, and we can have bad laws. I mean, look at the minimum wage law, right? That's another controversial thing. I mean, it's probably the stupidest law that's ever been invented or put on the books. The minimum wage law makes it illegal for certain people to have a lawful job, right? If you don't have a lot of skills, and you can't find an employer willing to pay you what the government has claimed is the legal minimum, then you can't get a job. Even if you can find all sorts of jobs where the pay is lower than the minimum wage, you can't accept those jobs. Even if those jobs would ultimately improve your life, allow you to acquire skills that you don't now have, so that one day you can earn a lot more than a minimum wage. If at the beginning you can't qualify for the minimum wage, you're legally unemployable. I mean, that's a horrible thing to do to young people, to prevent them from getting skills. At the same time, will allow them to borrow a bunch of money to go to college and study liberal arts and graduate with hundreds of thousands of debts and no marketable skills. Whereas the same person, if we just let them work for low wages instead of pay money to go to college, but get money, but maybe not get a lot. But after 4 years, they may have enough marketable skills where they can out-earn that college-educated guy or gal with no debt.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. I've never quite understood people's take on that, to be sure. I mean, I understand their argument. I just think it's a bit nonsensical when you really get down to how people can get on the ladder. Okay, we got to talk about China. I have a very Thucydides trap view of China. I think that we are on a collision course. I think there's just something about the human mind where you cannot have a rising power going against a declining power and expect them not to end up in a fight. I know, because I read endlessly about this, that China is well aware of Thucydides' trap. I know America is well aware of Thucydides' trap. And yet, right now, as we record this, you've got Xi and Trump going back and forth with who can hit the other with a restriction or a tariff. And we're headed down, maybe not all the way to kinetic war, fingers crossed, I hope. But we certainly are. China has said, and I quote, "Whatever kind of war America wants to have, be it trade or otherwise, we are prepared to fight all the way," or to the end, I think they said. Where's your head on China?
Yeah, well, look, I think that Trump is overplaying a very weak hand, to use his own analogy. I think China is in a much better position here. China is the creditor nation. China is the producing nation. We're the debtor nation and the consuming nation. We depend on China, not the other way around. There are billions of people around the world that can buy what the Chinese produce, and they can pay for it. And by paying for it, I mean they can export goods to China. See, people don't realize, but exports are a means to an end, right? The reason that you export, if you're a nation, you export to afford to pay for your imports, right? The whole idea behind trade is comparative advantage. So one nation that has a comparative advantage, meaning that they can produce something more cost effectively than maybe another country can produce it. So they produce an excess amount of that and then trade it to acquire the goods that the other country produces, that it produces more efficiently than they do. Right? So you concentrate on what you do well, you make extra, more than you need, and then you trade that to acquire the goods that other people make that you need, right? And so everybody wins from trade, right? Everybody gets to consume more because everybody produces more because they produce what they can produce efficiently, and then they trade. But America, we import over $1 trillion a year more than we export. So the world is not getting stuff from us. They're getting paper. But I think what China is going to be doing more is exporting products to countries that produce the stuff that they need, right? So they're not just going to buy treasuries. They're going to get stuff. And if you look at what's happened, trade with China year over year is up dramatically. Their global trade is going way up, even though their trade with America is going way down, because they're trading more with other regions of the world. They're trading more with South America. They're trading a lot more with Africa. They're trading more within Southeast Asia, trading more with Europe, right? Because China makes stuff that everybody wants. They make great stuff. Why do you think we buy so much Chinese stuff? It's not because it's crap. It's because it's good. We need it. We want it. And there are people all around the world that want that stuff. And so China will just sell it to other people, or even better, they'll consume it themselves. What's preventing the Chinese from consuming more right now? It's the exchange rate. So if the dollar tanks and the Chinese RMB goes up, let's say you double the value of the RMB, right, relative to the dollar, now all the goods that China produces, for the Chinese, the price is cut in half. Well, gee, a lot of Chinese will now buy stuff. Oh, I can afford it now. The Chinese factories, they don't have to sell the goods to Americans because, well, the Americans are broke now because the dollar has been cut in half. They would have to double prices to get the same amount of money, but Americans aren't going to have twice as many dollars. Just because the dollar lost half its value doesn't mean we have twice as many. I mean, that's why with these tariffs, Trump was elected promising that the foreigners were going to eat the tariffs. It was an external tax, right? We're not going to tax Americans. We're going to tax the Chinese. We're going to tax the Mexicans. We're going to tax the Canadians. That's bogus. We pay the tariffs. The tariffs are on American consumers. They're not on foreign producers. And, now, it's such a hassle. Even, I put this on X the other day, but my wife had bought me a couple of pairs of shorts. And I liked them. I really like these shorts. And I said, hey, can you get me a few more in different colors? And she bought them online, but the company is in France. And they said, oh, we're not shipping anymore to America because of the tariffs. And we're not even shipping to America anymore. And so they just said they don't even want to deal with it, even though the Americans would have to pay it. Just the hassle of having the tariffs, on the being collected, and they just were like, screw it, and somebody said, well, I'll just buy American shorts. Well, no, because the shorts I wanted are not made in America. And I don't need new shorts. I got plenty of pairs of shorts. I just like these particular shorts, and now I can't have them. Now, of course, if I'm on vacation, if I'm in St. Bart over the winter, yeah, I could pick up a couple of pairs there, right? But I can't order them here because they won't ship them in. But to the extent that they are sending them, the prices are going up. My friend here, was buying these soccer jerseys, and he had to buy some more, and the price skyrocketed because of the tariffs. So it's not like they're not just saying, oh, Americans are having to pay tariffs, so we're going to reduce our prices. No, they haven't reduced their prices. Americans just have to pay the price plus the tariff.
Yeah. Now, so economically, get that. I maybe have a slightly more pessimistic, I'm not sure if that's the right word, view of where the Chinese economy is. I think they have their own 2008 moment happening right now. But where do you think, from a standoff between Taiwan, like, do you pay much attention to the things that Xi says and where they're trying to take the country in terms of their first regional, but then ultimately global position? I
definitely look at, what's going on in Taiwan. I mean, we own Taiwan Semiconductor. I own that stock. It's like it's a key business, and I have investments in Hong Kong, and so obviously that's important there. But the way I think this whole thing is going to end up, I think that at the end of this crisis, China is going to emerge on top. I think that China is going to be the dominant economic and probably military power for the majority of the 21st century. I think that, you're going to see a significant decline in the value of the dollar. And that's going to automatically mean that the Chinese economy, their GDP, is going to be much higher than the United States. And of course, they have 4 times our population, right? There's 300 million or so Americans. There's 1.2 billion Chinese. And for most of human history, China was the dominant economy in the world. So, it makes sense that they'll be the dominant economy again. But if you look at what's happening there, the demographics and the industry and the savings, they're in much better shape. They do have problems. I'm not saying that it's perfect in China. They got a lot of problems. And a lot of the problems are the consequence of the dollar's reserve status and a lot of malinvestments that have been made based on, perpetuating America and vendor financing the American consumer as their customer. I think they made a bad bet. They shouldn't have done that. But I think that structurally, fundamentally, the Chinese economy is in better shape than the U.S. economy overall. We have some great companies here, and there. I'm not saying that there's no positives in America, but taken in totality, we've got some serious problems that I think are even bigger than the problems that they have in China. And I think that's a controversial opinion. A lot of people think that, no, China's a basket case and we're number one. But I think this dollar crisis and this sovereign debt crisis that coming is going to expose that fiction. And people are gonna see. I think we're Great Britain in 1900 and China's America. We're the great power that's in decline, and they're the rising power that's gonna take our place. Now, I mean, that doesn't mean, all right, we don't have to be the dominant economy. I mean, people, not everybody can live in the dominant economy. I mean, people live in Germany, and people live in the Netherlands or Switzerland, or they live in Brazil, or they live in Australia, and they have good lives and they enjoy themselves and they have families. So it's not the end of the world if the Chinese economy is bigger than the U.S. economy, or if China is the dominant economy. I mean, it's not like, the world is over, but that's what's going to happen. There's no doubt in my mind. Whether the U.S. could ever reclaim that, it's hard to say, but it depends on the road that we go down. I mean, if this crisis produces an even bigger U.S. government that is even more socialistic than the one we got now, if we end up with more government, more regulations, more government spending, more programs, more taxes, then we're never going to catch China. On the other hand, if the result is a complete, dismantling of our big government and our welfare state, and we completely free up the U.S. economy so that we can recreate the capitalism that we had during the 19th century. If we can create that level of economic freedom and completely minimize the government and actually, bring it back within its constitutional limitations and restore the Constitution, then, yeah, I mean, we could easily climb back on top. I don't know how long it'll take. But it doesn't, the end of the day, what's going to matter is our individual standard of living and our individual lifestyles, not, which country is richer than the other country.
What do you think about the moves that we're making now, or I guess I should say Trump specifically is making to get ownership in American companies like Intel? Do you think that's a page out of the Chinese playbook, or are we moving in the right direction to repairing America's financial situation? How do you read that?
Yeah, I mean, if it's a page out of the Chinese playbook, it's the one that we don't want, right? It's the page that we want to let them keep. It's a socialist concept. I mean, the U.S. government should not be taking stakes in any companies. The U.S. government, is not a hedge fund, or they're not supposed to be picking winners and losers and deciding where to allocate capital. That's not what you want government to do. You want the free market to allocate capital because it does a much better job. It does it much more efficiently. Everybody wants to look at, the government's going to invest in a company. Okay, where is the money coming from? Because the government doesn't really have any money. It has to redirect money from the private sector. So if the government's going to, subsidize a particular company or a particular industry, it has to suck the capital away from some other industry that otherwise would have gotten that capital in a free market. And so then you have to believe that the judgment of the government is better than the judgment of the free market. Well, where is there a precedent for that? Where have we had a central government authority that's done a good job of allocating resources and capital? There is none. There is no precedent for that. All of the proof shows that it's the capital, it's the free market. Look at East Germany versus West Germany, South Korea versus North Korea, South Vietnam, North Vietnam, Taiwan, Communist China, Hong Kong. I mean, anytime you take the same people, right? Everything is exactly the same. And all you do is you change the economic model from free market to government planning. It's the government planning that is a disaster, and it's the free market that succeeds. So everything that Trump is doing in this respect is a mistake, right? And it is a bad precedent, because if you approve of Donald Trump deciding where to invest money, well, then you better be prepared for AOC to make her investments if she becomes president, right? Even if you think Donald Trump is this super genius, which he's not, I mean, he's a good marketer, he's a good promoter. He had a lot of failed businesses as a private entrepreneur, right? He had a lot of failures. And so, and it's nobody, no government, nobody is smart enough to know where the capital needs to go all the time. That's why you need a free market. But if you happen to think that Donald Trump is so smart that we want him doing this, well, now you set the precedent that whoever is president gets to do this, right? That's and wild. So do you really want AOC? I mean, what kind of companies is she going to fund, right? And again, when you fund one company, you deny capital to another company that might otherwise have got it, or another industry. I mean, case in point is crypto. The U.S. government, because of Trump's policies, a lot of money is fueling the crypto industry. That money would have gone someplace else if it wasn't for the favorable policies and the direction that the Trump administration is pushing everybody. I mean, one of the reasons is everybody believes, the government is behind this. Strategic Bitcoin reserve, other things. Trump says, I want to make America the Bitcoin capital of the world. Why? I mean, if we're going to let the free market, if that's what it should happen, let it happen. But the government shouldn't decide, here's the industry that we should lead in. No, the free market decides that. What if he picks the wrong thing? What if I'm right and this whole thing is a big bubble and Donald Trump decides to funnel all this money into this gigantic bubble and we end up losing all this capital, right? Squandering all of our resources, because Donald Trump decided this. And one of the reasons that Donald Trump may be doing this is because now his family is all in on crypto. They've started all these crypto businesses. And so I think what Donald Trump is thinking about is what's good for the Trump family. What's good for my kids? Well, they're in this business, so I'm going to steer money into my family business, right? That's another reason why you don't want politicians using the political power to advantage their own interests.
What do you think politicians should be able to invest in?
Well, I think they should be able to invest in whatever they want. They just can't use government policy to then manipulate markets to favor what they own. See, if the government just follows the Constitution, we don't have to worry about what they invest in because they don't have the power to rig the game, to tilt the playing field. It's when you give them the power, now you have to worry about where they put their money. That is the problem. I mean, it's like when you give politicians a bunch of power, you're going to expect people to be bribing them, and because they're going to want that power used to their advantage. That's human nature. The way you deal with it is you take the power away from government. You're never going to be able to prevent a corruption in government. There's always going to be corruption in government. So what you have to do is make it so that corruption doesn't pay. You take the power away from government to deliver favors to the people who pay them, right? And so if there's nothing that you could do for me, then why am I going to bribe you, right? But Trump has put himself in a power where everybody can bribe him. I mean, look, for example, with the tariffs. Trump puts these big tariffs on and then says, okay, I'll give you exemptions, right? So what are you going to do for me? And if you do something that I like, the tariff won't apply to you, right? So he's now using tariffs as a weapon, right? And basically to bludgeon individuals or companies, threaten them with this unless you do something that I like, and then I won't use this weapon on you, right? That's why the government shouldn't have the weapon in the first place. They shouldn't be able to extort companies or individuals into doing things, because they're threatening them with this weapon. When you give money to a politician, I have a business and I give money to a politician, and that politician now goes after my competitor, right? Files a lawsuit against my competitor, does something, right? I'm hiring the government to go beat up my competition, right? That shouldn't be allowed. You can't let the government have all this power, because the minute they do, you can't blame the individuals for trying to get government power used to their advantage, because if they don't, somebody else will get the power and use it against them. So everybody is vying for the government to be on their side. And the only way to stop that is to take away the ability for the government to take a side. And that's what the Constitution did effectively for a long time. But Donald Trump, like no other president I've seen, is weaponizing the power of government specifically to his own advantage and to the advantage of his friends and family. And I don't like that. I don't like it at all. Now, Trump's policies, are helping to make me richer than I've ever been because his policies are driving up the price of gold and silver. And I've got a lot of money in gold and silver, and I got even more money in gold and silver mining stocks. And so, he's enriching me, but I'd rather him be enriching the country with the correct economic policies that I constantly advocate for. In fact, all of the things that I am advocating would result in me making less money. But I don't invest based on what I'm advocating for. I invest based on what I think is going to happen. And so I'm confident that the government's going to do the wrong thing. I'm confident the Fed is going to do the wrong thing. And that's why I have all these gold stocks.
Yeah, I hear it. Peter, every time I get to spend time with you, I am over the moon. I can't thank you enough. Where can people hang out with you virtually and follow what you're doing?
And thanks a lot, Tom, for having me on. Always a pleasure. And I'm happy that you give me the opportunity. First of all, I do my podcasts. I usually do one a week, sometimes two a week, sometimes three. If I have the time, but I have less time these days. But if you go to schiffradio.com or my YouTube channel, you can get my podcast. Apparently, I've really been shadow banned by YouTube for a long time. So the only people that actually ever listen to my YouTube videos are the people who are subscribed and go there, because YouTube never recommends them to anybody. So you got to find them. But I put them up there. Subscribe to the channel. I almost have about 600,000 subscribers. I've been right below 600,000 for like 3 years. That's apparently the number they won't let me cross.
Interesting.
But I got 1.2 million followers on X, so you can follow me there. I'm constantly putting my thoughts. I do all that myself. I compose all my own posts. So if you read something, it's because I wrote it. And so follow me there. But I think the most important thing that people can do, other than telling their friends to listen to me so we can disseminate this information and get the truth out there. Because when we have this economic crisis, the government's going to blame it on capitalism. And I want as many people to know that the government caused the problem and the only solution is capitalism. Right? Not more government, but less government. But people need to protect themselves. They need to protect themselves from the inflation and what it's going to do to the typical American. So you need to get out of bonds. You need to get into gold. You need to get into silver. You need to own real money as your savings, not fiat. And go to Schiff Gold. And if you have money in crypto, you could take some of your crypto, as you said, and buy some gold or silver as a hedge, just in case your crypto collapses too. You might as well have some gold and silver. We make it easy to get out of crypto at Schiff Gold because we work with BitPay. We were one of the first companies to work with BitPay, where you can check out, you can go online, buy some gold or silver, put in a shopping cart, and when it comes to checkout, you can go to pay with Bitcoin, and you can use your Bitcoin in the same transaction and get gold and silver. And if you have a larger portfolio where you just don't want to have all your money in physical gold and silver, you want to have stocks, you want to get dividend income. I have mutual funds, I have an asset management company. That's really my bread and butter, is managing investment portfolios for people. We do that at Euro Pacific Asset Management. So the website is europac.com. And I would encourage people to have a consultation with one of my representatives. You can just give us a call, toll-free number, or just sign up to have a consultation. We can talk about how we can help manage your money. You can transfer an account over for us to manage. If you're a do-it-yourselfer, I've got 5 mutual funds that you could buy no load at any of the discount brokerage firms. You can get all the information about my mutual funds. You could get a prospectus and all that, see the track records. All that information is on the website at europac.com. And in fact, if you don't have a brokerage account, you can actually buy in the mutual funds directly through the europac.com website. And then I also have a newsletter, a free newsletter that comes out several times a week. You can subscribe to that at schiffsovereign.com. We're putting out a lot of excellent content that I would encourage people to read. It's free. We do have some premium services that you could check out, but at least start by getting the free letter. And, Schiff, you just have to enter your email address, some information at schiffsovereign.com, and you'll start getting them in your inbox.
I love it. Peter, thank you again, man, for taking the time. I really appreciate it. And everybody at home, if you have not already, be sure to subscribe. And until next time, my friends, be legendary. Take care. Peace. If you like this conversation, check out this episode to learn more. The U.S. is adding $1 trillion to the national debt every 100 days. And the interest payments alone now cost more than our entire military budget. Our rate of debt accumulation has pushed us into something called fiscal dominance.